up, world? Established Rich coming right back at you. And today I want to talk about something that a lot of people are thinking, but nobody is saying out loud. We need to talk about J. Cole. We need to talk about the fall off. And we need to talk about why this album has turned into the new detox. Because at this point, that's exactly what it is. For years now, J. Cole has been telling us the same thing. The fall off is coming. The fall off is next. The fall off is a statement. And every time he says it, the expectation gets heavier. This was supposed to be the album that closed the book. The album that put him in rare air. The album that said, I've done it all and I'm still here. But here we are, year after year, era after era, and we still don't have the album. Now we being told that the reason is simple. That Kendrick was on the album and that Drake was on the album. And after the beef, everything had to be redone. And I'm just gonna be honest with y'all. That's some bullshit. Not because it don't sound logical on the surface, but because it doesn't really hold up when you think about who J. Cole has been telling us he is for the last decade. This is an artist who built his entire image on standing alone, on not needing features. So if that's true, why would 2 features stop an entire album? The real issue ain't features. The real issue is identity. Because before that apology, J. Cole had a clear lane. He was the peaceful killer, the humble assassin, the guy who didn't chase beef, but he never ran from it either. And then that moment happened. The diss dropped. The response came back, and instead of standing in it, he backed out publicly.
So all of this time of me moving on my own accord, for the first time I was tested. Why am I tested? Because I got the world, and I got my niggas like, what you gonna do, Cole? My niggas like, boy, I must have had 1,000 missed calls. Oh my fucking God. Text flooded, I couldn't even answer my shit. Nigga, it's wartime, boom, 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 right? Niggas wanna see blood. And I was conflicted because, one, I know my heart, you know what I mean? And like, I know how I feel about my peers, these 2 niggas that I just been blessed to even stand beside in this game, let alone chase their greatness, right? So I felt conflicted because I'm like, bro, I know I don't really feel no way, but the world want to see blood. I don't know if y'all can feel that, but the world want to see blood. So I say all of that to say, in my spirit of trying to like get this music out, I ain't gonna lie to y'all, I moved in a way that I feel spiritually feel bad on me. Like I try to like jab my nigga back and I try to keep it friendly. But at the end of the day, when I listen to it and when it comes out and I see the talk, that shit don't sit right with my spirit. That shit make me feel, that shit disrupts my fucking peace. So what I want to say right here tonight is in the midst of me doing that and in that shit, trying to find a little angle and downplay this nigga's fucking catalog and his greatness, I want to say right now tonight, how many people think Kendrick Lamar is one of the greatest motherfuckers to ever touch a fucking microphone?
And once you do that, every word you write after has to answer for that moment. This is what people don't want to admit. The fall off didn't get delayed because of Kendrick and Drake. It got delayed because the version of J. Cole that wrote that album no longer exists. That version died the day he apologized. And I know that's gonna make some of y'all mad at me. I know people want to spin it as maturity, as growth, as peace, but hip-hop don't look at it like that. Perception is reality. And the perception now is that J. Cole avoids competition when it gets real. You can agree or disagree with that, but you can't ignore that it's out there. So now the question is simple. What does he rap about now? Do he come back talking that best rapper alive talk? Does he still claim he's smoking everybody? Does he still put himself next to Nas and Pac and the all-time greats? Because if he does, people gonna say he frontin'. And if he don't, people gonna say he fell back. That's the trap. This is why this album is stuck. The fall off was built around confidence, built around finality, built around dominance. But you can't sell dominance when you opt out of the biggest battle of your era. And that's not hate, that's hip hop. This is a sport, whether people like it or not. And when the playoffs start, you don't get credit for checking yourself out the game. Now, don't get me wrong. J. Cole is talented, skilled, a great writer. But this ain't about ability. This is about believability. And once believability is damaged, it affects everything. Every bar, every claim, every comparison. That's why this album feels like it's being rewritten over and over. Not because the songs are bad, but because the story no longer matches the man. This is also why going ghost makes sense. When you don't know what version of yourself to present, silence feels safer than speaking. But silence also lets the narrative grow without you. And right now, the narrative is not kind. The narrative is that J. Cole had his moment. And when it was time to stand on it, he chose peace over proof. Again, you can respect the human decision and still acknowledge the hip-hop consequences. Both can be true, and that's where we at. The fall off is no longer just an album. It's a question. Who is J. Cole in 2026? Is he the sage who stepped away from the chaos? Is he the competitor who still believes he's number one? Or is he the great artist stuck between who he was and who he wants to be seen as. That's what this project has to answer. And until he figures that out, the album ain't coming. Not because of features and not because of beef, but because the mirror is harder than the mic. So now we at the real question. Not when the fall off is dropping, but what happens if it does? Because timing is only part of the problem. Content is the bigger one. When you strip everything back, hip-hop don't reward intentions. It rewards moments. And that moment, the apology, is now attached to everything J. Cole does moving forward. That don't mean he can't recover, but it does mean he can't pretend it never happened. See, the worst thing he can do is drop an album that acts like the world didn't see what it saw. Because fans are smarter now. They remember context. They remember energy. They remember who stood and who stepped back. So if he come out rapping like nothing changed, people gonna side-eye. Not because the bars ain't fire, but because the story don't add up. Hip-hop is storytelling, and right now, his story got a gap in it. On the other hand, if he comes out apologetic again, if he comes out trying to sound above it all, that's gonna land just as bad. Nobody wants a whole album of moral high ground from a genre built on competition. So he's stuck between two bad options. This is why I said earlier that the J. Cole we knew before that moment is gone. Not as a person, as a position. Before, he was a guy who could say, I'll body anybody. And you could believe it. Now, every time he say it, people are gonna ask, but will you actually do it? And that question changes everything. This is also why the comparisons have stopped. You don't hear people putting him next to Kendrick no more. You don't hear the Nas comparisons like that no more. Not because he lost talent, but because he lost edge. Now let's talk about the bigger picture, because it's not just about J. Cole. This is about what happens when an artist spends years building a myth and then has to live up to it in real time. The fall off was marketed as a conclusion, as a statement piece. But you can't conclude a story when the climax didn't go as the people expected. And here's the part that most people won't say out loud. Hip-hop has moved on. Not completely, but enough. New artists are dropping. New moments are happening. The culture don't wait. So the longer this album sits, the higher the expectations get. And the less room he has for error. This is no longer just an album drop. It's a career moment. And those are dangerous. Because if it misses, there is no spin. You can't blame features, you can't blame beef, and you can't blame timing. It all comes back to him. Maybe the fall off ain't supposed to come out. Maybe the idea of it meant more than the actual project. Maybe it did its job just by existing as a concept. Because sometimes the anticipation becomes bigger than the art. And once that happens, the art can never win. If he drops it and it's good, people will say it should have been great. If he drops it and it's great, people will say it should have been a classic. If he drops it and it's a classic, people will still say you ducked that moment. That's the box he's in. And I don't say that with joy. I say it with realism. Because J. Cole is one of the few artists who actually cares what hip-hop thinks. And that care is both his strength and his weakness. Right now, the culture is waiting. Not for a date, not for a track list, but for direction. Who are you now? And until that question is answered honestly, the album is gonna stay exactly where it is. Unfinished, unresolved, and heavier every day it don't drop. Because at some point, you gotta zoom out and stop talking about the album and start talking about the moment. What we're really watching here is what happens when an artist outgrows the version of themselves that the people fell in love with. Not in a bad way, but in a human way. J. Cole didn't lose talent. He didn't lose intelligence. He didn't lose his ability to rap at a high level. What he lost was a certain type of belief from the audience. And that's not about bars, that's about identity. Hip-hop has always been a space where who you are matters just as much as what you say. People don't just listen to lyrics, they listen for intent. They listen to energy. They listen to whether or not you're willing to stand on it when it gets rough. That's why this moment hit the way it did. Because for years, J. Cole positioned himself as the artist who was ready for anybody. Not loud about it, not gimmicky about it, just confident. But when the moment actually arrived, the response didn't match the image. Again, that don't make him a bad person or a bad artist. But it does change the conversation. This is why the fall off can't just be an album anymore. It has to be a statement of self-awareness. Because if he drops without acknowledging the shift, it's gonna feel disconnected. The only way through this is honesty. Who are you now that the crown feels heavier than you thought it would? Who are you now that the crowd isn't cheering the way it used to? Those are questions that make great albums. And if the fall off ever comes, that's what it has to answer. Because legacy is not built on avoiding hard moments. It's built on how you move after them. Some artists double down, some artists disappear, some artists evolve. We don't know which one he'll choose, and maybe that's why this album is still sitting. Not because he can't finish it, but because he hasn't finished reconciling who he is with who the world thinks he is. And that's a process no release date can rush. So until then, all the podcast talk, the speculation, the insider theories, they don't really matter. When it drops, it drops. And when it does, the music gonna have to do what words can't. And if it does that, even if it's not what people expect, it's gonna matter. And if it doesn't, then this era will always be defined by what could have been instead of what was. But hey, that's just my opinion. What's yours? Like, comment, subscribe, establish rich. I'll be back with another one. Peace.